I don't know how many interviews we've done, but you have been so far ahead of the mainstream, right? And you've taken heat for it.
Yes,
people called you freaking crazy, 3 years ago. Now they're not laughing. Now those people are freaking out. They are crapping themselves over what's happening.
Thank you for saying that, Mike. But you know what? I'm freaking out over it too, because, I said these things publicly when no one else thought it was relevant. And the fact that things are coming true and the fact that it's accelerating is frightening. And it should be frightening to all of us who love the status quo. Well, not even want to go that far, but to say the privilege that we've enjoyed as being the world reserve currency and the center of free trade and this wonderful democracy, which seems to be slipping away in many respects. It's frightening, but I thank you. Look, the bottom line is this: I'd rather know what's coming and have an opportunity to get out of the way of it. Like my buddy across the street, who's the top 40 money managers in the country, he'll get run over by it. He always says to me, when the market corrects, I just double down and buy more. It always works. It always has worked
until it doesn't.
Yeah. If you allow 8 banks to suppress the price in order to make weapons, well, that's a problem, but it never was a problem. Why wasn't it a problem? Because if you go back throughout my whole career since 1989, none of these entities across the globe ever stood for delivery. On COMEX, it represented 1% or less of contracts, and on the LBMA, it really never happened. It is something you can do, but these countries, 140-year-old LBMA and the COMEX in 74, most of these countries, the entire lifespan of both of these exchanges have been third world nearly. They haven't been sophisticated, coordinated, and motivated enough to stand for delivery, but they are beating us at our own game. They're beating us because they understand the significance of silver, that it should not be industrial, it should be strategic. You have a big movement in Canada trying to move it to that classification as strategic. You need it in so many of these applications. Why would 8 banks be stupid as a mud wall in a rainstorm trying to hold down the price when countries like China are going all around the world buying concentrate and doré, when India is buying 800 million ounces over the last 2 years? These are really important things to consider. And I think what you're witnessing right now here is these countries are wise to what the West is doing. Ultimately, if you just put all of these things together and realize that the commercial banks and the central banks, who are the most collectively well-informed and well-financed traders in the world, are telling you where this is going. And if you don't pay attention to the Goldman Sachs report or the UBS report, where the hell do you find it, right? Where are you going to find it on the mainstream? Are you listening to the mainstream, who isn't saying a word about any of this? It's not easy to find and read through these analyst reports for UBS and Goldman Sachs. It sucks reading it, to be honest with you. And they're 25 pages of a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And then they say, yeah, gold's going to 3,000 by the end of the year. But if you only relied upon, and that you consider yourself very well read by reading the Wall Street Journal, watching Fox News, and paying close attention to the markets, you are missing this completely and totally. There is your massive contrarian indicator. Not only are the biggest boys in the world telling you, yeah, this is where it's going, but you can't find it unless you dig.
Okay, so here's our first question from the Broke Stacker. Will there be balloon payments on us homeowners during bank runs, failures similar to 1929?
I don't know, but I would say that when people talk about debt forgiveness or whatnot, these you're not going to get out of paying it. I don't know if there will be balloon payments or not. Maybe. I think there will be certainly some sort of a period of allowing people to not pay, because I mean, if it got really bad like that, if it gets really, really bad, that's, these banks are going to go out of business seriously because of things like defaults, mass defaults across the board. So I don't know how it all plays out. Maybe we all end up owing BlackRock our life savings as they go around buying up all of these mortgages. I'm sure that they would do something like that, because quite frankly, this could very well turn into a 1929 style event, maybe even worse, where it's hyper stagflation, not a Great Depression, but a hyper stagflation, which is in essence the Great Depression meets the printing press. So will they allow for some sort of debt forgiveness or forbearance? Probably. I don't know what it looks like, but yeah, I wouldn't try and think that you're getting out of your payment just because everything else collapses. There'll be someone to pick up the pieces and knock on your door and say, by the way, you do owe us some money. And let's not forget that you are an unsecured general creditor of the bank, and you are i.e. the last to be paid. So when you deposit money, you're not depositing shit. You're putting money in the bank, which is giving the bank an unsecured loan. You are lending the bank money, and it's unsecured. You don't have any collateral, and they just say, I'm going to pay you some interest. And for years, it's been poultry interest, but that's what the Dodd-Frank Act says, that you are an unsecured general creditor and you will be bailed in if there's a problem. So, I think if I had $1 for every time people who get it are buying large orders because they don't trust the banks, I could buy a few gold coins out of that, because that is the issue. And they just today was the integration of the Dodd-Frank reform, not the Dodd-Frank, sorry, the Basel III reform, where the banks have to have up to like 4.5% collateral or reserves. And that's a well-capitalized bank. Up since the pandemic, it's been zero. So you give them money, they take it and buy treasuries or something. They don't have to leave it in reserve. And that's why the banks got in trouble, because too many people said, give me back my money. They didn't have it, so they had to sell their underwater treasuries. Well, if 4% is a well-capitalized bank, I mean, think about it. If you had 4% of the money that you understand what I'm trying to get.
Yeah,
I can't give a good example, but the good example would be, let's just say everyone gave you their money for a fantasy football league, and you're the commissioner of the fantasy football league, and it's a $500 entry fee, and all you keep is 4% of it. At the end of the year, there's a problem if what you invested the 96% in is underwater. Yep. And now you have to sell it, and how do you pay everyone back? Because you only have 4% on hand, and maybe everything's down 20%.
Goldman Sachs just came out and said a year from today, if we go out to September or October of 2025, they're calling for 3,050 gold, 3,100 by the end of the year. That's in Goldman Sachs Investment Research. UBS says 2,900 by the third quarter of 2025. They're pretty much there at the same time. One of the interesting things about Goldman Sachs that they mentioned in their report was they openly discussed increased secretive buying in London for an unknown buyer, and which is really, really interesting. When you is it the PBOC? Perhaps. Is it the PLA, the People's Liberation Army? Perhaps. When the People's Liberation Army buys on behalf of China, they don't have to report it to the IMF. We saw what happened with Saudi Arabia purchasing 160 metric tons of gold. They tried to do it on the sly, but the export numbers from the Swiss caught it, flagged it. All of these countries are doing everything they can to accumulate and accelerate it. 8.1% of the entire London metals float of silver was delivered in the month of August. Now, these people aren't screwing around, and they're accelerating, and they understand that gold and silver are far more valuable than the dollars that are used to purchase them.
Inflation or 7% increase in the money supply, your currency is cut in half, the value of it. So not only do they mask the ability to really easily find this information, most people don't have any idea about maybe the most important thing that you can learn as a young person, and that is the laws of compounding, how it can work for you, or in this case, against you, and to be able to protect yourself from this insidious hidden tax of inflation that is cutting, in essence, the value of the pound in half every 10 years. So you have to be able to prepare and get out of the way of that. And that's one of the things that I think is so very important, what you're trying to teach people. And in fact, I did an interview with G. Edward Griffin the other day, who speaks a similar message to you with the creature from Jekyll Island, talking about the mismanagement of the Federal Reserve. But these are things that people need to know. And I asked him, I said, what would be the most important thing that you would teach a young student in class and nowadays, and what would you add to the curriculum? And one of the things he said is to understand the laws of compounding, to understand the laws of of interest.
And in particular on the exchanges. If we look at the London Bullion Metals Association, it's a 140-year-old exchange, the oldest metals exchange on the planet. Just in the month of August, we saw 8.1% of all their silver delivered off the exchange. Where'd it go? Who's got that kind of money to buy 26 million ounces of silver? When you look at the way they trade in London, they admit to trading 20 million ounces of gold per day and 290 million ounces of silver per day. Now they have 800 million ounces of silver in the LBMA vaults, of which they say 500 or more million belong to the ETFs. So that leaves 300 million ounces, right? But they're trading basically the entire stash every day. But they say, by the way, guys, we are understating those settlement numbers, or those numbers, by about 10 times, because we only post the final settlement numbers, not all the trades that it took to get there. Well, if that's the case, that means they're trading 2.9 billion ounces of silver per day, of which 90+% is all paper backed by nothing but paper, which is 3.5 times annual global mine supply. You look at the COMEX market, they're trading 15, 16, 1700% more paper than they have bars behind it. Now, that's the same thing the Hunt brothers noticed in 1980. But it's real. The rehypothecation, meaning if I have a contract for 5 1,000-ounce silver bars and you have a contract for 5 1,000-ounce silver bars, there's a high probability, well, there is a probability that we both own the same contract thinking that we own our own. It's rehypothecated over and over and over. It's Bernie Madoff. It's Bernie Madoff running a great shop until everyone said, give us our money. Oh, you're not running a great shop. You are running a Ponzi scheme. And in many ways, that's what the Western system is. If we go back to the meeting that was in Johannesburg last year for the BRICS, a lot of people, I remember sitting on a boat with, at a conference, there was a boat cruise where all the speakers got to go and have drinks and talk with one another. And I sat for 2 hours having drinks with James Rickards back then. And it was in July of 23. And he was telling people publicly that there's a good chance that in South Africa last year that the BRICS would issue a common settlement currency. And we were talking for a while about this. And a lot of people came back after that meeting when they didn't issue that common settlement currency. And they said, well, it's a nothing burger. What they did say is that instead that we're going to continue our research on a common settlement currency. In the meantime, everyone will trade with one another in local currencies. And we've seen a lot of that where Russia is trading with India for rupee or ruble, or China is buying corn and soybeans from Brazil, paying with digital yuan or whatever. All of these countries trading with one another in their local currencies. That is the first premise here of Enbridge, is that Enbridge will allow these countries to maintain their own autonomy, have their own little ecosystem for their economy, and to maintain a strong ecosystem so that they can trade with one another in rupee or real or ruble instead of US dollars, and back and forth using their own central bank digital currencies using Enbridge.
So this is from the Israel Post just a couple of days ago. Israel to consider limiting ownership of precious metals. Okay, so we're not talking about confiscation, but we are to some extent here either trying to dissuade people from owning precious metals or looking outside of the system as the system is crumbling, or is this a trial balloon to eventually get to the confiscation? Andy, what do you make of this thing here?
Well, I think that I hope that it's only a proposal and they don't actually do something that foolish. But it would do the same thing with Bitcoin. That would be the next to follow in cryptocurrencies. If you do something like this, you're trying to trap everyone within the monetary system. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very foolish decision. It would only create more of a black market. But nonetheless, the article talks about, we need to be able to tax everyone fairly and equally and portray these people as people who are tax cheats. It's right. Something that I hope anyway is just a stupid proposition. It's no more different than when in 2009 they came out and said that we should take everyone's IRAs. There was a bill that floated all the way down to the House floor and put that money into an annuity of sort backed by treasuries to stabilize the treasury market should we see another great financial crisis. That was voted down, but it made it out it actually came out of the genie bottle. Same thing here. Let's just hope that it's nothing more than a proposal or a talking point and not real. I don't think they would do it here in the United States. I've always said I think that's why they have GLD and SLV. You got SLV, the largest stockpile of silver in the world, held by the biggest cartel crooked bank on the planet, JP Morgan, and of course BlackRock. They're the custodians. JP Morgan, who paid a $920 million fine for manipulating the metals market, is still allowed to be the custodian of the largest silver trust in the world and partial custodian of GLD, which is the fourth or fifth largest stockpile of gold in the world. Now, they come in on a Friday night and take those two accounts and say, well, we didn't do anything wrong. You can still own physical gold and silver. Let's hope that doesn't happen. It was a disappointing story to even see, but desperate governments do desperate things, I guess, is the name of the game. But you can't let that deter you. You have to prepare the best you can and hope for the best. And that's really, to my honest feelings, all you can do, and hope that we don't cross that line. Because if we do, it's game over. It really is. At that point, we have bigger problems. The bottom line is that you have so much suppression in the price of gold and silver that price discovery has yet to even begun to take center stage. When you have an asset that can be rehypothecated and traded over and over and over and over and over again, paper contracts on COMEX and the LBMA, which has distorted the price, this is exactly why I think there is a tremendous way to go. You here in the United States, if you would have told me gold's almost $2,700 an ounce and you would hear nothing about it on the mainstream, I've been doing this for almost 35 years. And I remember when gold was trying to break 400, I couldn't finally believe it when it finally got over 400. And it was all over the newspaper. And now it's 2,700 nearly, and not a damn word. The contrarian indicator is ridiculous. And I don't know. I just simply think that it has a long way to go. And I think it will be pegged to a new system. Even Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, said a CBDC not pegged to something will be fiat. What is the only other tier one reserve asset? Gold. And what are all the central banks doing? They're buying the hell out of it. The central bankers are the most well-informed traders in the world. Forget about how much money they have. They know the playbook. The most powerful bank in the world revalues gold as the only other tier one asset. All the central banks buy it like it's going out of style. And then you see all of the countries repatriate their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed, which, these have been the hubs of gold ownership forever. The countries would leave their gold at the Bank of England and the New York Fed to have access to the LBMA and the COMEX with Western rule of law and safe jurisdictions. And now they're all repatriating it and bringing it home. Large portion of that is because of the weaponization. But the other part is, if you read the white paper on the unit token, the gold that will be used to comprise these tokens will be held within the borders of the countries that possess it and independently and continuously audited, which would then mean the gold doesn't have to be sent to Beijing or to Moscow. Everyone will hold it themselves. All of these countries bringing back their gold and increasingly purchasing it. I just think that there is no question in my mind that gold will be far higher than people think possible and will never come back down because it will be pegged to a new system.